Are you able to see it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. First and foremost, I wanted to, before I dig into it by myself, I just wanted to know if you had already any ideas about the topic or you had done any researches around it, and what are your thoughts in that respect?
So I didn't do any research. This is just like my experience. But so with pen, so at first when I just kind of started getting into writing, I used the pen, and it was really kind of because I would just kind of write, and it was really quick, and it wasn't like serious or anything. But then later on, when I found that I really enjoy writing and I started doing it more, I found that it's way easier for me to use the keyboard because there's so many things you can do on your
At the same time, you can multitask a bit more.
yeah,
And you?
yeah. It's the multitasking, and there's also it's the speed as well with which
Yeah.
you type. So yeah, it's more maybe easier to do.
And you, Arina, what are your thoughts about the difference between handwriting? What is more functional for you, handwriting or using a laptop or your phone? I think you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I think that yeah, of course, keyboard and mouse is multifunctional things that we use now every day, but pen helps us to touch this to feel the okay. So we can feel the era of handwriting when the poets and writers were writing their their works, and also, I hope that I can, or people can improve their handwriting. And
okay, but what about you? Do you prefer typing or you prefer handwriting? What do you think is more functional for you?
Handwriting, I get tired of handwriting, but I prefer it.
Okay. Well, we have to explore this. Okay, the learning objectives, as you can see on the screen, is about the brain is formed of several parts. When you hear about the brain being split into hemispheres, is a bit of a reductionist description, because the brain itself is, yes, it's subdivided into big, large parts, but we have a huge amount of different little tiny parts that actually do an extremely important work. And the brain parts that are involved with writing, memory, and learning are very similar parts that are involved with typing itself. There are different studies that go in different directions, but there is still no actual proof that the overuse of typing is not as efficient as handwriting. And from what is my perspective as a student of neuroscience, I could say that I believe it mainly depends on the individuals. As individuals, we might respond better to one structures. Like, for example, I like handwriting, but I have a background in fine arts. So I'm used to constantly making notes, writing, doodling, and scribbling. And if I don't do that, I don't actually listen. If I don't make notes while somebody's talking to me, I couldn't memorize what they're saying. But then again, at the same time, I love technology because, like you were pointing out, it does allow you to obviously multitask and do different things at the same time. So the learning objectives here is just mainly to take a look at the brain parts involved when we actually do this action, because we think we're just focusing with our eyes, where that only a part of us is actually concentrating on the action, but technically the whole brain is participating to that, and we constantly have thoughts coming in and out. And that's what we're trying to do. We try to select those thoughts and focus on our tasks. And then we can see how handwriting, doodling, drawing can actually help, or at least for some people, to memorize things better, because you actually have to reproduce that thought and put it in action. So while you're doing this double action, you're fixing the memory in the brain. And when we recall it, there might be a sound or a color or something that triggers that memory, and it comes back to you more easily because you connect it to an image that you produced, that it's not just produced by a screen. There is a chance that in a way, that in good and bad, technology is reshaping our brain and society at large, because obviously more than any time before, you're constantly on the phone, and we have different types of gadgets that allow us basically to work from everywhere. And obviously that includes reading and writing all the time. But whether or not we retain effectively that information is another story. Then there is how basically the brain loses and what it is that we are gaining with technology. How can we combine writing gadgets and then use it effectively? And in terms of 6 points, I put self-development, active thinking, and socialization, in the sense that with so many gadgets, it's true that there are many losses in terms of social interaction. But I have recently watched a very inspiring interview with a lady who is severely disabled. She has a very rare disease that is called, well, not the scientific name is a bit long, but the general name is called Lou Gehrig syndrome, which basically paralyzes the neuronal networks between brain and muscles. So she actually is able to communicate with her children because of a computer, and she can actually type by blinking her eyes because she still has control over her eyelids. So in this sense, technology can also be incredible because it allows somebody like this to actually not get stuck and unable to communicate, but she actually has a computer that she can type through the eyelids, and then the computer translates into words, into sounds, what she's trying to say. And lastly is how can we work together to reshape technology and use it effectively in, well, obviously not in that complex way I just mentioned, but for example, in schools, as a teacher, I noticed that lots and lots of students were constantly on the phone. They did not know that they could research maths, that they could actually get extra help to do their homework, that there are actually dedicated websites for science experiments, neuroscience, mathematics, and calculus. And that's something that only with pen and paper we obviously cannot do. So the two can always come and meet each other halfway. So the basic structure, well, this is a very simplistic image, but it starts giving an idea. These are not all the parts of the brain. These are the basic parts of the brain involved with writing, memory, and learning. So as you can see, there is all this part, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobes. There are other parts that are inside that they're also involved in learning and memory, especially long-term memory, which is the hippocampi, which has a very interesting function because among other things that it does, it helps us visualize, retain memory, and keep those memories for a long time, because it's an ancient part of the brain. It starts developing when we are still embryos, so it's very old, and we have it since we are children. An interesting thing about the hippocampi is that it actually has to vibrate between 5 and 12 hertz in order for us to actually retain memories. So during experiments, they noticed that if scientists prevented that constant vibration inside that little part of the brain, then the rest of the brain would not retain memories well enough. repeat the tasks that they were then, for example, obviously they did these experiments on mice, not on humans, but the mouse at the point when it was no longer vibrating could not recall what it had learned. So how the brain works is actually quite crucial. Now, there is another aspect about using the pen and handwriting, which is that of scribbling. Scribbling, making notes, writing, or even just producing images while somebody is talking actually can help retain memories. And there is lots of research in this respect that is actually quite interesting. Why do you think it is that when people draw manually tend to fix memories a little bit better in their mind? You have to unmute. I can't unmute. I did not mute you.
Oh, yeah. Also, could you please make the screen just a little bigger, because it's really hard for me to see.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, actually, I can.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So I think doodles can kind of help the person see what's in the unconscious, because I think when you're doodling, you're not really focusing on what you're drawing so much. Like, I wouldn't say you're like thinking, oh, I'm gonna draw something like this. No.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I think it's like your brain telling you what you're drawing. So
exactly, that's an extremely good point and a very good scientific intuition. It's true, what you said is perfectly correct. When we are not thinking with this, with the prefrontal cortex, which is what we call more of the rational part of the brain that helps us obviously reducing stress and making sure that our reactions are not just random explosions. And one of the work is that part is that sometimes it gets overwhelmed with too many messages. And when we doodle, we tend to let that part relax and the rest of the brain recall memories that just pop out. And then we can filter again what is relevant for that moment. I made it bigger because you said you couldn't really see it before. So now that that's the screen again. And Yorina, what are your thoughts about what do you think, for instance, obviously now that we pointed that out, I can ask you different questions. Why do you think that some people respond better to screens and the use of technology rather than pen and paper? You have to unmute yourself though. I didn't mute anybody.
So the question, can you repeat please? I don't understand it.
Why some people do you think are better at using computers and they don't like writing or drawing, but they memorize better using technology? Why do you think that could be, what could be the reason for that?
I think that the answer is in the structure of our brain, and as our brain is built differently, and so we all of us have some difference, and yes. Some of us are capable and they manage their computers good, and some of us tend to write better, and so the people who whose brain is better and structured and is capable for multitasking, and so they can manage the computers.
Yeah, it can have to do sometimes with age, because obviously younger people are exposed to technology in earlier stages in their lives, so they probably process it as a natural thing to do as compared to somebody older. But like you said, it can be also predisposition. And I have to say, in my experience, especially students with any sort of disability responded very well with technology, because obviously they had a bridge, something that would allow them to fill the gap. Whereas some people, like is written on the screen, doodles fills gaps that we create. So obviously we're not meant to remember every single thing that we do. We would be exploding with a huge amount of memories. We have to let some things go, but they are never completely gone. They can be recalled. And for people with disability, that's the gap that actually technology helps to bridge. While I was preparing this lesson, I came across lots of research on the matter, and there are two stands from lots of scientists that are generally quite surprisingly for me, either black or white. And I think there's a rainbow in between, a rainbow of variety, a huge amount of individuals who may respond well to one thing rather than the other. What do you think we are losing in general sense? It's true that today we can write, we can draw, we can basically even record songs, do whatever, literally whatever we want to do with technology. But in terms of writing and drawing, is there maybe something that we are losing in terms of motor skills?
Yeah, so I think that when we're kind of using technology, I think it also depends a lot on what exactly we're using. So like our phone or like the laptop, or like recently I've been saving up for an iPad because I wanted a device which would allow me to write and type at the same time. And like I would definitely say that painting, maybe just like real painting, not on the device, it takes a lot more time because you have to kind of mix it and open the things and stuff like that. But when you're painting digitally, you have all these tools and you just need to like click on it and it's really fast. But it worries me that, for example, if there was a situation where people would have to draw something and they wouldn't have a device, like I worry that people who are used to digital art, they would just be really slow because they're not used to the.
Yeah, exactly. It's true.
So
that's a very good point. That also goes for writing. I have worked with students that were absolutely ashamed of showing me their handwriting because they were so accustomed to typing even during classes that for them to show somebody the way they actually wrote with pen and paper, and they're actually pretty slow in terms of if I had to say for their age, like their handwriting was a bit behind as compared to even though they were doing very well, but they were so accustomed to the use of technology that they couldn't balance it anymore, like the way they should have. What is, instead for you, Arina, the opposite question, what do you think we are gaining with the use of technology in terms of how we use the brain, how we deal with situations that require us to obviously be fast?
When we are writing, we're gaining more difficult skills. Also, so when we write, we do more difficult movings, and when we typing, typing is much more lighter, and it's and we mustn't do so.
So what you're saying is that we can be more efficient in how we use our time.
Yes, but but when we type in, our motor, our skills, they can become worse, and we can lose their skills which we gained in the childhood.
All right, I see what you're saying. Yes, I understand. Like you gain some skills doing certain things by hand during childhood, and then as you grow up, by continuing using technology, you gain new skills, but you sort of you're unbalanced because now you completely forgot about those refined motor skills that allow children to draw and do things without actually questioning themselves. That's true. But I absolutely saw this many times in class. I had to insist every time I propose a task that involved making small drawings to better understand any scientific concept. Most of the students were absolutely terrified of even drawing a cell. And it took me some time, obviously, to just explain. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a matter of doing it, seeing a picture, copying it. And like you were saying before, Kim, retaining these skills allows you to be more eclectic in the sense that if you're in a situation where your iPad or whatever technological support you generally use is not there, is not available, you're still able to explain somebody, then somebody that doesn't speak our language, okay, this is what I want to do, just a few lines, but to explain the concepts. And that's actually quite important. I just wanted to show you briefly what kind of tools they use and how brain images are produced. Back in the day, patients that participated in this kind of research on how the brain functions used to wear very heavy helmets, and then they had to be placed inside machines. But recently, obviously, technology is allowing us to make it different. So this is basically what is being produced. And this young lady is actually writing and drawing on a computer, and in front of her there is a screen that records everything. So it's basically connected to a computer that immediately shows on the screen the brain parts that are involved in the task she is executing. So as you can see, writing versus tapping, drawing versus tapping, or writing and drawing. And the areas that you see in color are the brain areas that I more or less showed you in the previous image. Let me retrieve it. Yeah, they're pretty much the same parts. Whereas in here, you see it for real. It is actually quite interesting that we are now able to do this, and we are able to do this because of the use of technology. It's a matter of balancing things out and realizing how to use it effectively. In my case, when I, for example, teach students that don't like maths, one thing that really helps me engaging them is showing how maths is related to science and art. So I combine the two and show them actually there is a lot that you can do. Another thing that I use when students don't like maths and writing is showing them things that have nothing to do with what we're doing. Like for instance, x to the power of 2 equals 1 is something that you cannot solve, because in rigorous mathematics, as you're taught in school, you cannot solve it. But then I show them videos that in calculus in university, you can actually solve it. So it's always a matter of finding a way of meeting each other at a middle point where you can engage students and show them that, yes, there are things that you can still do by hand because you have to do your reasoning. And there are things that you can really improve by using effectively technology and progressing in that sense. So in my, from my perspective, the two have to go hand in hand. There isn't a way of deciding which one you want to forget. Technically, we are forced to use both. It's true that technology is taking the toll, but it's also reality that when we go around, we might not necessarily have what we need right there and then with us, so we still have to be able to use our hands. Why do you think there is a tendency, though, that I did experience myself in class, but I have also saw it right now in scientific studies, and that is somewhat, why do you think technology sometimes make people lazy, and so they don't use it effectively, so they lose the handwriting habits, but they're not very good at using technology either?
So I personally think that if you're using technology, just like my approach to it is that it should save time, obviously, but it should also enhance. So I don't really like using technology to do everything for me, because I feel like we have calculators everywhere now. It's like we have them on our phones, we have them just like in school, we have them everywhere. And it's like when you come to a place where you don't have it, or like your phone is dead or something is dead, and you just have this temporary panic, and in your head you know that you can do the sum, but you still have this kind of instinct to search for something to do it for you. And I think that because we have so many things available to us, like we have Google and we have the maps and the things, like it's so much easier to just seek for something to do it for you. Like you're the one who kind of tells the machine what you want to do, but it's still ultimately the machine that does it for you.
That decides.
It's lazy, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I noticed that I had some students when I taught adults who told me, "Oh my, you're making us write so much. Why are you? We're not giving us handouts." And I had just asked a very simple question. I said, "Where are the handouts that you received in the other lessons before mine?" And they were all wrapped up somewhere in the bag, completely forgotten and already smashed underneath somewhere. And I said, "See, if you're actually writing it, by the end of the lesson, you're less likely to wrap it up and throw it somewhere because you wrote that." There is a bit of a more of a personal connection with the tool that you have just used. But there is a tendency that, like you said, some people tend to actually sit back and let it do it rather than doing it themselves. Arina, I wanted to ask you, like, for example, what kind of technology do you use in school, depending on the course? That can be different things for languages or science.
At school, I used so it's at school we had a whiteboard, and so we can write on this board by using a special stick, and this boy knew how, and not all schools have this board. Yeah, and this, I think that this is the only this was the only technology of the modern world. I mean.
So you use the internet as well. You use the interactive board where you can use images and match it up.
I can touch, and I can write with the finger and with a stick, so everything.
Okay, my question is, in class, I would assume that most students respond well to that, like they interact with the board. Do they use it effectively? Do they use it efficiently? Do they make good use of that, like in class, after when they go away, they have to do the homework and come back tomorrow? Do they remember things better because they have used the board?
I think that these boards have improved our learning process, because it simplifies it, and when we, for example, when we are doing exercises at the math classes. In the math classes, we do it. We did it generally together, and everyone was participating in this process, and it made us closer to each other. And so in this way, we can the information can be retained better.
Yes, I understand. That's very good, actually. It's a pretty good point. Yeah, it's true. In many ways, it can make us lazy in doing things, but like in this instance or the examples I was given, when technology and support is used correctly, then it can be really efficient and really reinforce learning and memorization, because you constantly connect an action with an image or a sound, something that triggers your memory, and you keep building upon those stimuli, so that by the time you finish the course, you have a huge amount of information that is organized based on the stimuli that you received. It can be visual, it can be in terms of writing, it can be auditory, but altogether, if we use technology in synchrony, then it can be really useful. There is the danger that it can be more passive, in the sense that you have to make less decisions. You have to do fewer things by yourself in order for things to happen. But there is also the flip side that tells us, yes, it's true, I can become lazy in that sense, but if I improve my skills and get to know the object or the software better, then I can actually improve my own skills. For instance, there are softwares that I've used with learning difficulties, or people who actually had physical disabilities. And some of these softwares also included video editing. Now, video editing can be very basic and simple, and the computer does everything for you. It can be very complex because you use different sides of the software, where you have to actually make lots of decisions and decide a huge amount of things, from what you want to keep, what you want to delete, and how you want to put the images together. And in terms of helping people with brain injury or with learning difficulties, is good, because for them, despite the fact that it's complex, it's fragmented. So they don't see a huge big thing that they don't understand. They see little bits and pieces that they have to choose, pick up and put together. So in that sense, at that point, actually, the use of technology is making them more active. And I think that that's the crucial problem with finding a balance between the two. For the last, in terms of understanding how we use it and what part of the brains are involved, and how personal ability can produce different outcomes. Attention and focus have been a huge, for a very long time, have been a huge focus of interest for at least the past 60 to 70 years. So all the discoveries that we made about the hippocampi vibrating, and if it doesn't vibrate, we cannot produce the same long-term memories. There are memories that we select and decide not to remember because they're too traumatic. There are different parts of the brain involved in all these that sometimes we do without actually deciding. But the filter that we have is the prefrontal cortex. Now, some studies have proved that overuse of technology make people more passive, more lazy. But on the other hand, there have been different studies on different subjects that actually say that no, that's not completely true. There are people who actually respond well to technology, and when they multitask, like you were saying before, both of you mentioned the fact that on the computer you can multitask. Lots of people are actually much more stimulated because they're taking care of 3 or 4 different tasks at the same time, and that actually is stimulating the brain. There are also there are lots of studies that actually involve the use of the constructive use of video games or video games like experiments to actually measure short-term memory and fast decision making, how we respond to danger. There is one thing that I would like to highlight if you're interested in how our brain works, and it's the fact that our brain as a whole does not know what is real and what's not real. We respond to both stimuli. That is why we react so emotionally to sad movies or romantic scenes, or why we are scared during a horror movie. The brain is perceiving that image, that message as real. It's the prefrontal cortex that then filters the message and says, no, we know that it's not real. But our response, our emotional response, is the same as if the event was real. We rationalize later on, and then we decide, okay, I don't have to cry all day because somebody did not actually die. But we respond with sadness to the message. And that's actually quite important, because the over-attachment to technology sometimes can make us think that we are not able to do whatever it is that we were doing without the computer, without the internet. And that is where it becomes a bit dangerous, because we forget that we are actually perfectly capable of doing a huge amount of things. It's just a matter of reorganizing the information and say, okay, I can do this. I can actually write an article without the computer because I actually know the topic. I might not have access to 10 different resources, but I can definitely build a good 200, 500 words. And it's the same with stimulating the brain by handwriting and typing. And as a matter of fact, most recent studies, I put the references at the end, so I can share this presentation with Miss Vasileva later, and she can give it to you if you're interested. I put the links of all. These are not random websites. They're all the last three that you see at the bottom. They are proper medical websites that I generally use when I do any research. It's pretty complex, but if you scroll down and only look at conclusions and the images of the brain, that would be pretty clear for everybody. And the other ones on top are from basically writers who actually have PhD in neuroscience or related subjects. So it's actually quite interesting. And ultimately, I really think that, actually, before I get to that, so basically, my point was that, yes, there are studies that prove somehow that handwriting is more effective and doodling actually helps retaining memory. But on the other hand, there are studies that actually confirm the opposite. Why do you think there are two realities opposed and yet both real?
I think it's like the thing with studies, which makes me really hesitant to consider them as an actual source, is that while they are often accurate, we have to remember that the sample of people they kind of use as their test bunnies, it's just like a sample. It's not the entire population.
Perfect. So, yes. What else? What else can you think?
About why the studies contradict each other?
Yeah.
Oh, I would say that maybe the methods that they're using to like test vary as well, because like I mean we need to look at two individual studies if I were to comment in more depth, but just like as an overview, maybe one of them recorded the brain activity and the way it's improved or changed, yes. But maybe the other one could have recorded the attention or like what it actually did to the brain. So yeah, I think that's what's
perfect. That's a very good way of analyzing things. When we study, our senior doctor that oversees our work constantly tells us to question the study, go through the methodology, see what were the criteria of inclusion and what were the criteria for exclusion. To my own surprise, large randomized studies are extremely selective. Yeah. So the portion of population that they actually select is really not representative of the population at large. When they do these same experiments of use of and lack of technology with subjects with mental health, I am shocked because I have worked directly with mental health people. And when I read through the screening, who was excluded, most of the patients I worked with would have been excluded because they were less literate. But lots of people with mental health and learning difficulties are less literate. So who you actually are measuring it with, like you really need to obviously constantly question what was the study about. And it's actually quite an interesting thing to do, because then you change one parameter and you think, oh wow, maybe the results would have been completely different.
Could I ask you a question? Because
yes, of course.
You work like with neuroscience and the brain. Do you think like the way that the studies are selective, do you think that has to do with the person, like the person who's hosting the study? Do you think that has to do with that person's like cognitive bias? So if they like believe something, then they're gonna kind of unconsciously choose the...
It was actually part of my previous module. Yes, there is lots of bias, especially when they do trials on medications or methods where, for example, like in this case, we're talking about technological tools that can help this or that particular mental health condition. But then, yes, then again, there is bias, which is normal. We're humans. So for instance, if we have a university and I work for that university and we've been working 5-6 years on developing a tool that could help people with schizophrenia actually dealing better with their vision, because we have moduled a software that help projecting their fears and using those characters as actually the visualizations that they are constantly seeing, that it's great. But then when we do the trial, it's not as positive as we thought. But at the end of the day, we actually have spent the past 6 years on that tool. So in that sense, yes, there is always some bias in many ways. But the good thing about science is that at the end of the day, whenever you publish something, what happens is that you have to provide others with the tools, and you have to tell them, okay, I did this experiment by doing A, B, C, and D. So they will try to reproduce it. And by the time they try to reproduce your experiment, they might have different results. And that's when it can still be enriched. So one thing that, for instance, one of my professors recently said was that he thinks that lots of negative studies are just no good. But then I personally disagree. And when I Googled my doubts, I found out that other scientists actually had my opinion. No, negative studies are still positive because you still are learning something. The result is not positive for what we were researching, but we still have learned maybe why it's not working. We still have learned what are the flaws and the weaknesses, and we still can continue and actually go moving around that. So I like the words of science and arts because they're constantly transforming and helping each other. There should be more cooperation between the two, which brings me to the next point. But I wanted to ask Alina, if you could put together a tool to help somebody who is not very literate, what method would you use to help them write better? Would you use pen and paper? Would you use technology, or would you use both?
I think that we should use both methods, and we should manage with both things, with pen and computer, because nowadays it is computer. The significance of computer is raised, and but we mustn't forget about the pen and handwriting, in order not to forget our motorical skills.
Perfect, yes. That's very, very important. it is quite important because it's also about filtering information and also managing a space, organizing thoughts in a way that is constructive without necessarily Googling things. We can actually organize our thoughts and our research by ourselves. Before I write anything for uni, I try to make it my point to write a few words, just pen on paper. What I recall, what I remember were the things that I want to touch. And I think it's still productive doing that because it pushes, especially if we do it with young children, it's good that they continue developing creativity in many different ways. And the last bit I put is the last image that is just my thoughts. It's not from any famous author, but I'm quite attached. I'm quite attached to that kind of thinking because in using my methods, I saw that most of my students really progressed, especially in languages, science, and maths. But there was a constant use of both technology, but used effectively, and handwriting. So for instance, when we did the lessons, no matter how difficult they found it, I would always prompt them, okay, write a couple of paragraphs, see what you remember, or what we touched, what we did, what you thought was more interesting. And then putting together the information, okay, how can we create a PowerPoint presentation based on what we just did? So in my opinion, it's a constant way of combining the two rather than rejecting one in favor of the other. We can't go back to the 1700s and only use pen and paper, but we can't just forget about how actually interesting and good for the brain it is to do things with our hands. And writing is one of the things that we can actually do. So what literally I wanted to dedicate the last 5-7 minutes just listening to you, and let me know if you have any more questions or if there's something that we didn't do or that I didn't speak about and you would like to know more.
Yeah, so I actually have quite a list of questions that I wrote as you were speaking that I was interested in. So first I wanted to ask you about the research. So you talked about how you look at other people's studies and you publish your own findings. And I wanted to ask you, where and how do you do that? Do you meet with people, or is there like a website that you use to find what other people wrote, or do you just Google the topic and like see what comes up?
Well, no, it's a combination of everything. Before the pandemic, I was looking to work in a couple of labs, but now with the pandemics, everything is upside down, so there is a lot less contact. But because I'm an online student, compared to somebody who used to go to class, I have an advantage because I'm already used to organizing my work and myself. But there are resources that you access from the university that they give you. And I do a lot by myself on the internet, but as compared to some of my colleagues, I have to say that probably because of my background, I am kind of more effective at finding interactive labs, online labs. I found that there are actually scientific labs that show you three-dimensional work online. I signed up for 2 medical websites where you can generally sign up only if you're a science student, and they constantly inform you of literally the latest changes in machines that are being produced, new types of microscopes, and new researches in this on that field. So even if now they're still above my level, I like the fact that I'm already accessing these kind of tools. You do right now, you do a lot online. That's a given. But I'm looking forward to the end of the pandemics because I really would like to go to a lab and obviously interact with people who are more experienced than me. But there are also platforms that you can use. Even smaller, there are ways of using Twitter, for example. There is actually a good bridge to reach out to other students of neuroscience and people who are doing experimental statistician. So even though I might not be directly involved with the research, I still receive alerts on what they're doing and how they're progressing. And that's a great thing. Because now it would be I would be lost without it. And you, Arina, do you have any more questions, or just say, for example, for instance, things I didn't touch and you would like to talk about?
I think that's all was for me interesting, and now I have no questions, but I want to see one more time the picture with the brains, right and left. Yeah, this one. And as far as I understood, the red airs, they point out that there is less less activity. Yeah, is I the red less activity, and the brighter ones more activity.
Yeah, yes, it's true. There is a reason as to why with drawing we'll see less activity, because there are differences. If you're copying something, our brain is reading that picture and we are trying to reproduce it. If we're just randomly writing or doodling, then it's different. Like we said, the rest of the brain is kind of relaxed. We're not even thinking. One trick that I usually do, and I'm happy if you want to try it. Whenever a student tells me, "Oh, miss, I'm terrible at drawing, I don't want to," I just tell them, okay, use your left hand, or if you're left-handed, use your right hand. Why do you think I do that?
I think it's because the students, like, since they know they're worse with their other hand, they don't have the same pressure to do better.
Perfect. You're spot on. That's perfect. You nailed it. That's the exact reason. The reason why I ask them to do that is because they don't expect anything good coming from themselves. Another trick that I use is say, I'm just taking it, this is actually my paper from my last exam, but if, say for instance, this is the picture, I turn it upside down and tell them, okay, copy it. Now the brain cannot read anymore the logic of those lines. If you take even the most beautiful portrait, if you turn it upside down, it's just at the start is random lines. And if I ask you to copy it, you don't expect anything from yourself because you've never done it before, you're using your left hand and the paper is upside down. But then when I turn it and show them what they did, 150% of the time, they're all jaw dropped because they didn't expect anything good. And I think that for us as humans, technology has done a lot in good, but it's also kind of raising the expectations sometimes too much. If I ask somebody to do a drawing, for whatever reason, they think that they have to do it perfectly like a professional painter. But that's not how we should work. We can't constantly be the best at everything that we do. We also have to accept that there will be always things where we are not as good, or we're not as good at that moment, then we can get better in time. What do you think about expectations in this respect? What do you expect from technology, and what do you think can we do to use it more effectively?
Well, I think with technology, once you have a chance to experience how strong it can be, when it slows down, it's like difficult to adjust. So, for example, if you're in a place with a stable internet connection versus a place where it's not only stable but it's fast, and in your mind you understand that it doesn't matter, you still get the work done, but then that other pickier side of you wants to have the faster internet connection because it's you felt that technology can do more and now you want it to do more. So it's
Yes.
your expectations just refuse to stay where they are, they're always looking for higher.
Fair enough. Yeah. And you, Arina, what do you think could be done to make technology more effective, more efficient for us?
I think that it's important for us to connect our knowledges and to connect the technologies with the science and to create a robot. And there are sciences and studies which create a robot that can write and can understand the information and can read the emotions from the face.
Yes.
And, yeah, and I think that it will be cool when this robot can do a lot of things and can be yeah. So not only do one thing, don't both and read the emotions and write and yes, so on.
No, I understand what you're saying, because it's actually stuff like that is being used in clinical research, and it's giving actually good and positive results. But I have one final question before we close. How do you feel about technology that has been produced for people with disabilities that is now made available for everybody? Like, do you think it's useful, or you think it's another way of getting people a little bit more lazy and do a little bit less?
Well,
Arina,
I think it can be both. So.
A matter of combining both.
Yeah, to be honest, I think with technology, companies like Apple and Samsung, they obviously they get so much money coming from the people buying the technologies, and like us as consumers, we realize that they are overcharging us. But the fact that we've had access to this technology and we don't want to change it, like for example, once you've had an iPhone, it's really hard to change to Samsung, and the same for Samsung.
Oh, I see what you're saying, because you get accustomed to it.
Yeah.
And what do you think, what technology do you think can help more people with disability, maybe, that we can use as well?
Actually, I wanted to ask you kind of back like about the technology thing. So you mentioned that you were working on a device to help with schizophrenia, yeah. So I was just curious about what the device was.
Yeah, no, I can send a link to Ms. Vasilieva. No, I researched on that, and it was very interesting, but obviously I didn't work on that. But I was very curious in understanding how it actually worked, because I did use some similar technology with some of my patients, but it wasn't as advanced. So I was really curious but I can put the link in. I can also put the link for the interview, because this lady is actually, in my opinion, quite inspiring. And the fact that the computer can be literally responds to blinking eyes is amazing.
Yeah.
And I also knew.
Could you put like the link and everything? Could you put it in the chat box? Because I'm not sure if I have the lady's email or not. So.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, no problems. And you, Arina, what else do you think about the technology that we use for blind people or for deaf people that can we access? Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's unfair? Or what is your thought about it?
I think that technologies can give these disabled people a great chance to be more involved in the society and in our world in general. And we can help not only blind people and and other people. So and also we can help people who cannot move. They sit in the
wheelchair.
in the wheelchair, and they can move, and so we can these technologies can help them socialize, and I have heard about the one fact that blind people who can hear, they have a special device that enables them to hear sounds and speech. And so
Yes.
this is and this is so one step to the study.
Yeah, why my question is it so positive that we are always able to how can I put it, to constantly, like for instance, I noticed that lots of people try to walk less because now they have devices that were created for people who couldn't walk, and now they just don't walk and they use those devices. It's like sometimes it's a matter of balancing things and seeing what's really useful for a person rather than excessively use it because we're just being lazy. But I see your point, because obviously it's quite important that we actually have access to these, and that eventually we can balance things out. I'm sending a message now. I'm not sure. 1 second. Yep. Do you want the same video, Lina? It's about the lady that actually speaks with the eyes through the computer. I'll put it there.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you one last question about it's about your work with the disabled children. I wanted to ask you, do you work with like a university or like a company, and are you like a therapist? Like, what exactly do you do?
No, I started off, well, kind of a mixture, because now that I'm studying for a master's, I also took another qualification for personal training. So literally I can teach, I can do sport, and I can do science with patients. So my aim by completing the master's, I basically want to carry on later on studying. But as soon as I complete the master, I want to put these three things together and basically have clients that, rather than doing personal training, just for people losing weight, my interest was combining all these studies together. So literally kind of doing what we are talking about. So combining technology, my experience with my neuroscientific studies, and offer clients something different. But obviously the clients I would be working with wouldn't be normal people who actually just want to lose weight or just gain some muscle strength. It's more about, my aim would be to work with people with mental health or physical disabilities and make them more able from a physical perspective, but also because of my previous qualification and my neuroscientific studies, work on their food intake and how to use the brain more effectively. One thing that I noticed that is really worrying for me is that both children with ADHD and patients with schizophrenia, they're very, very, very often addicted to sugars. And that's something that I really want to work on, because it's not a matter of losing weight. Yeah, losing weight is good because you don't have type 2 diabetes, you don't have heart failure and whatever. But until we don't realize that the first organ that is affected by sugar is the brain, that might make a huge difference in how we perceive food. And I struggle with it myself. I'm type 2 diabetes. I had to lose 40 pounds all by myself because I gained that weight. So I know the struggle. But it wasn't until I relaxed and decided, okay, we need to stretch things out and forget about how we appear, but actually concentrate on the brain, that then I started having results, and I noticed that that works well with students and general people with disabilities. Those are the people I really intend to work to, also because it connects a lot more to my scientific studies. And at that point, it's like you also have data, which is, like you were saying before, lots of large studies have so many exclusion criteria that you don't know anymore which portion of the population they represent, because they excluded so many people. And my intent would be, like, once I get a good amount of clients, would be to do a research together and see. And I like the fact that groups have to be diverse to reflect the population. We are not 65, 70 kilo females, 165 height with this or that specific need. We are completely different. But I think that the use of technology, like we were saying, combined with sports and artistic studies, can actually help and bring the three together more effectively. Like with the thing that you were saying before, Alina, with the use of them, this interactive use of the whiteboard in school and constant interaction, that is actually more effective rather than just sitting and learning or being told what to do. So I think that moving forward, we will go more in that direction. Plus now with the pandemics, we have to use technology anyway a lot more. So it's probably constructive if we can actually do it effectively and put